Okay, so we are about to read the next chapter. Chapter 4. There was a dinner party, which was normal to do back in the days where this novel was written. Even though society and technology is moving forward at a very rapid pace. In fact, some people who were alive at that time might have said this is the pinnacle of mankind's achievements, despite the fact that there was a lot of inequality, right? Not only within the country, this was written in England, not only like within England between servants and the haves and have-nots, but also between countries, as in like England was literally at the top of the world. It was the basic height of the British Empire. But what do you do for entertainment? Well, you talk to people. You went to dinner parties. You do your job throughout the day, and a lot of these people didn't have their job. So they were just men of society, so to speak, like men of means, men of having inheritance, having rights to lands, etc. Falling down from feudal days were more or less over, but a lot of that inheritance continued on. And also, I take note that the author kind of had at his dinner party like a wide variety of people, right? The medical man, the psychologist, the very young man who didn't really have a job, right? But he was still somehow invited to this dinner party. The author, who's the narrator, which we don't know what he does or what his name is. Philby, the only person with a name that also isn't given a vocation. And then it's like the provincial mayor, right? What were some of the other ones? There was some publishers, some editors, right? So they're just like captions of society that you bring them together at a dinner party and they entertain each other. Well, all of a sudden, in comes the actual host, who looks extremely ragged, and he says, "I have a story to tell you." So they leave the dinner room, right? They leave the dinner room and they go into the kind of the relaxing area where they all relax and talk and schmooze. But I think he has the spotlight, so to speak, at this point because of his theatrics. I told some of you last Thursday of the principles of the time machine and showed you the actual thing itself, incomplete in the workshop. There it is now, a little travel-worn truly, and one of the ivory bars is cracked, and the brass rail bent, but the rest of it's sound enough. I expect to finish it on Friday, but on Friday, when putting together was nearly done, I found that one of the nickel bars was exactly 1 inch too short. And this I had to get remade, so that the thing was not complete until this morning. It was at 10 o'clock today that the first of all time machines began its career. I gave it a last tap, tried all the screws again, put one more drop of oil on the quartz rod, and sat myself in the saddle. I suppose a suicide who holds a pistol to his skull feels much the same wonder of what will next come as I felt then. I took the starting lever in one hand and stopping one on the other, pressed the first and almost immediately the second. I seemed to reel. I felt a nightmare sensation of falling, and looking round I saw the laboratory exactly as before. Had anything happened? For a moment I suspected that my intellect had tricked me. Then I noted the clock. A moment before, as it seemed, it had stood at a minute or so past 10. Now it was nearly 3:30. I drew a breath, set my teeth, gripped in my starting lever with both hands, and went off with a thud. The laboratory got hazy and went dark. Miss Watchett came in and walked, apparently without seeing me, toward the garden door. I suppose it took her a minute or so to traverse the place, but to me she seemed to shoot across the room like a rocket. I pressed the lever over to its extreme position. The night came, like the turning out of a lamp. And in another moment came tomorrow. The laboratory grew faint and hazy, then fainter and even fainter. Tomorrow night came black, then day again, night again, day again, faster and faster still. An eddying murmur filled my ears, and a strange, dumb confusedness descended on my mind. I'm afraid I cannot convey the peculiar sensations of time traveling. They are excessively unpleasant. There is a feeling exactly like that one has upon a switchback, of a helpless, headlong motion. I felt the same horrible anticipation, too, of an imminent smash. As I put on pace, night followed day like the flapping of a black wing. The dim suggestion of the laboratory seemed presently to fall away from me, and I saw the sun hopping swiftly across the sky, leaping at every minute, and every minute marking a day. I suppose the laboratory had been destroyed, and I had come into the open air. I had a dim impression of scaffolding, but I was already going too fast to be conscious of any moving things. The slowest snail that ever crawled dashed by too fast for me. The twinkling succession of darkness and light was excessively painful to the eye. Then, in the intermittent darkness, I saw the moon spinning swiftly through her quarters, from new to full, and had a faint glimpse of the circling stars. Presently, as I went on, still gaining velocity, the palpitation of night and day merged into one contiguous grayness. The sky took on a wonderful deepness of blue, a splendid luminous color like that of early twilight. The jerking sun became a streak of fire, and a brilliant arc, in space, a moon fainter fluctuating band, and I could see nothing of the stars, save now and then a brighter circle flickering in the blue. The landscape was misty and vague. I was still on the hillside upon which this house now stands, and the shoulder rose above me, gray and dim. I saw trees growing and changing like puffs of vapor, now brown, now green. They grew, spread, shivered, and passed away. I saw huge buildings rise up, faint and fair, and pass like dreams. The whole surface of the earth seemed changed, melting and flowing under my eyes. The little hands upon the dials that registered my speed raced round, faster and faster. Presently I noted that the sun belt swayed up and down, from solstice to solstice, in a minute or less, and that consequently my pace was over a year a minute, and minute by minute the white snow flashed across the world and vanished, and was followed by the bright, brief green of spring. The unpleasant sensations of the start were less poignant now. They merged at last into a kind of hysterical exhilaration. I remarked, indeed, a clumsy swaying of the machine, for which I was unable to account, but my mind was too confused to attend to it. So with a kind of madness growing upon me, I flung myself into futurity. At first, I scarce thought of stopping, scarce thought of anything but these new sensations, but presently, a fresh series of impressions grew up in my mind. A certain curiosity, and therewith a certain dread. Until at last they took complete possession of me. What strange developments of humanity, what wonderful advancements upon our rudimentary civilization, I thought, might not appear when I come to look narrowly into the dim, elusive world that raced and fluctuated before my eyes. I saw great and splendid architecture rising above me, more massive than any buildings of our own time, and yet, as it seemed, built of glimmer and mist. I saw a richer green flow up the hillside, and remained there without any wintry intermission. Even though the veil of my confusion, the earth seemed very fair. And so my mind came round to the business of stopping. The peculiar risk lay in the possibility of my finding some substance in the space which I, or the machine, occupied. That's a fair fear that he didn't realize until he had gone very far into the future. What if I stop the machine and someone's standing where my machine used to be, and now it's there, and we're both there at the same time? And at the same time? It sounds like a recipe for disaster. As long as I traveled through a high velocity for a time, this scarcely mattered. I was, so to speak, attenuated, was slipping like a vapor through the interstices of intervening substances. But to come up to a stop involved the jamming of myself, molecule by molecule, to whatever lay in my way, meant bringing my atoms into such intimate contact with those of the obstacle that a profound chemical reaction, possibly a far-reaching explosion, would result, and blow myself up and my apparatus out of all possible dimensions, into the unknown. This possibility had occurred to me again and again while I was making the machine, but then I had cheerfully accepted it as an unavoidable risk. One of the risks a man has to take. Now the risk was inevitable. I no longer saw it in the same cheerful light. The fact is, insensibly, the absolute strangeness of everything, the sickly jarring and swaying of the machine, above all, the feeling of prolonged falling, had absolutely upset my nerves. I told myself that I could never stop, and with a gust of petulance, I resolved to stop forthwith. Like an impatient fool, I lugged over the lever, and incontinently, the thing went reeling over, and I was flung headlong through the air. There was the sound of a clap of thunder in my ears. I may have been stunned for a moment. A pitiless hail was hissing round me, and I was sitting on a soft turf in front of the overset machine. Everything still seemed gray, but presently I remarked that the confusion in my ears was gone. I looked round me. I was on what seemed to be a little lawn in a garden, surrounded by rhododendron bushes, and I noticed that the mauve and purple blossoms were dropping in a shower under the beating of the hailstones. The rebounding, dancing hail hung in a little cloud over the machine and drove along the ground like smoke. In a moment, I was wet to the skin. "Fine hospitality," said I, "to a man who has traveled innumerable years to see you." Presently, I thought what a fool I was to get wet. I stood up and looked round me. A colossal figure, carved apparently in some white stone, loomed indistinctly beyond the rhododendrons, through the hazy downpour, but all else of the world was invisible. My sensations would be hard to describe. As the columns of hail grew thinner, I saw the white figure more distinctly. It was very large, for a silver birch tree touched its shoulder. It was of white marble, in a shape something like a winged sphinx, but the wings, instead of being carried vertically at the sides, were spread so that it seemed to hover. The pedestal, it appeared to me, was of bronze and was thick with verdigris. It chanced that the face was towards me. The sightless eyes seemed to watch me. There was the faint shadow of a smile on the lips. It was greatly weather-worn, and that imparted an unpleasant suggestion of disease. I stood looking at it for a little space, half a minute perhaps, or half an hour. It seemed to advance and to recede as the hail drove before it, denser or thinner. At last I tore my eyes from the monument, and saw that the hail curtain had worn threadbare, and that the sky was lightening with the promise of the sun. I looked up again at the crouching white shape, and the full temerity of my voyage came suddenly upon me. What might appear within that hazy curtain was altogether withdrawn. What might not have happened to men? What if cruelty had grown into a common passion? What if this interval the race had lost its manliness, and had developed into something inhuman, unsympathetic, and overwhelmingly powerful? I might seem some old-world savage animal, only the more dreadful and disgusting for our common likeness, a foul creature to be incontinently slain. Already I saw other vast shapes, huge buildings with intricate parapets and tall columns, with a wooded hillside dimly creeping in upon me through the lessening storm. I was seized with a panic fear. I turned frantically to the time machine and strove hard to readjust it. As I did so, the shafts of the sun smote through the thunderstorm. The great downpour was swept aside and vanished like the trailing garments of a ghost. Above me, in the intense blue of the summer sky, some faint brown shreds of cloud whirled into nothingness. The great buildings about me stood out clear and distinct, shining with the wet of the thunderstorm, and picked out by white in the unmelted hailstones piled along their courses. I felt naked in a strange world. I felt, perhaps a bird may feel in the clear air, knowing the hawk wings above it, and will swoop. My fear grew to frenzy. I took a breathing space, set my teeth, and again grappled fiercely, wrist and knee, with the machine. It gave under my desperate onset and turned over. It struck my chin violently. One hand on the saddle, the other on the lever. I stood panting heavily, in attitude to mount again. But with this recovery of a prompt retreat, my courage recovered. I looked more curiously and less fearfully at this world of the remote future. In a circular opening, high up in the wall of the narrow house, I saw a group of figures clad in rich, soft robes. They had seen me, and their faces were directed toward me. Then I heard voices approaching me, coming through the bushes by the white sphinx, were the heads and shoulders of men, running. One of these emerged in a pathway leading straight to the little lawn upon which I stood with my machine. He was a slight creature, perhaps 4 feet high, clad in a purple tunic, girdled at the waist with a leather belt, sandals or buckskins, I could not clearly distinguish which, were on his feet. His legs were bare to the knees, and his head was bare. Noticing that, I noticed for the first time how warm the air was. He struck me as being a very beautiful and graceful creature, but indescribably frail. His flushed face reminded me the more of beautiful kind of consumptive, that hectic beauty of which we used to hear so much. At the sight of him, I suddenly regained confidence. I took my hands from the machine. Bum, bum, bum. Alright, so he's traveled into the future. He's done it. We don't really know how far. We do know that he's somewhat had a crash landing because, what if a machine from the past were suddenly to appear right here in this room, right here where this table is right now? There would be something here where it's supposed to be, and those two things would essentially collide molecule by molecule through the force of time rather than the force of distance, kind of like rolling a bowling ball down the hill toward the pins and gaining momentum, but gaining momentum through time. And what would that sort of collision look like? So that's an interesting concept. And then what is going on here, right? He's seen buildings come up and come down, the hills and the trees die, and all the landscape change. He's on the same hill that his house used to be at, however long it was before. we're going to assume a very long time. And now, what's here? He's wondering, what am I going to run into now? I'm going to run into, has humanity become savage beasts? Is the world overrun? Is humanity gone? And then there's a 4-foot, very frail creature in soft robes, who looks, as he described it, beautiful, right? Soft. So what does this future hold in us? Coming up in chapter 5.